Good afternoon. My name is Ben Soper, and I am a senior here at Johnson University. I am currently in Jeff Snell's senior level preaching class, and today I get to preach for you. My time here at Johnson has been awesome, and it's taught me a lot about the Bible, and today I get to share some of the things I learned with you. I have just recently done a 7-month internship at a church back home in Indiana. Today, we're going to be camped out in the book of Genesis. Now, the book of Genesis is one of my favorite books of the Bible. There are so many awesome tales being told and stories that are unraveling, and just the overall theme of Genesis is amazing. But there's one story that strikes me. I'm like, man, I really love that story. And that is the story of Joseph. Now, Joseph is kind of an anomaly in Genesis. He gets a huge chunk. I believe it is the largest chunk of anyone in Genesis that has, like, all the chapters are about them. He has 14. It starts in chapter 37 and goes all the way to chapter 37. All those chapters are about Joseph and Joseph's family. 14 chapters. To put that in perspective, Adam, the first man that was ever made, 5 chapters. Noah, the only survivor of the flood, has 6 chapters. And Abraham, the father of our faith, gets 11. So why does Joseph get 14? Because, every single one of those 14 chapters is solely based on Joseph, right? Well, I'm going to summarize the first 5 chapters of Joseph's story, starting with verse 37, or with chapter 37, and ending in chapter 41, and you can tell me if every chapter that is about Joseph is really about Joseph. Chapter 37 of Genesis. We start with Joseph being born. He has dreams. His brothers sell him into slavery. Chapter 38 talks about Judah, one of Joseph's brothers, family problems with Tamar. Chapter 39 goes over Joseph's temptation from Potiphar's wife, and then him being wrongfully imprisoned. Chapter 40, Joseph interprets 2 prisoners' dreams while he is in prison. And in chapter 41, Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams. Now, one of those chapters kind of stands out to me, because I didn't use the name Joseph in it. Chapter 38 has nothing to do with Joseph. It's actually the only one of those 14 chapters where Joseph is never mentioned. This chapter seems to interrupt the Joseph narrative. It seems out of place. It seems like when I read through this, I think, why is this here? Joseph just got sold into slavery. What happens to Joseph? But we're interrupted with this chapter, and I can't help but wonder why. I mean, this chapter is about one of Joseph's brothers. We don't see any other stories about Joseph's brothers in Genesis. The only time they're mentioned is when they're near Joseph or with Joseph. Some would say it interrupts, some would say it's out of place. But what if I told you it's right where it needs to be? And this chapter holds a lot of importance. But before we dive right into the text, I think we should pray. Heavenly Father, God, I just come before you today. God, I would ask that you would use me as your mouthpiece to deliver what you want to be delivered, to say what needs to be said. And God, I just pray that you would open our hearts and open our minds so we can take something away from this. Father, we love you and we praise you. Amen. All right. So let's get into the text. Genesis chapter 38, verses 1 through 5. And how this is going to work is I'm going to read a section of the story and then we're going to talk about it. You know, we're just going to go text, talk, text, talk. That's how this is going to work today. Alright, so we're starting in verse 1. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite whose name was Hirah. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived once again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore them. These first 5 verses set a very important scene for us. Personally, if I was in Judah's shoes, I would be tickled pink. Judah leaves his family and he finds the one. Judah falls hard. Judah ends up having not 1, not 2, but 3 children with this woman. All seems well for Judah. If Judah and I switched places, I would be extremely happy. But I would be lying if I said that Judah's perfect world was going to stay intact. Let's jump back to the text starting in verse 6. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." Here we see a common trope in Genesis, and that is the firstborn children stink. They are bad. To give you some examples, Cain, firstborn, murders his brother. Esau, firstborn, gives away his birthright and blessing. And Ishmael is born to the wrong woman. The firstborn children are all removed for various reasons from birthright and other blessings. And Judah's son is no exception. He is so wicked that the Lord puts him to death. I don't know how wicked you have to be for the Lord to just strike you dead, but I imagine it was very wicked. Now, Judah has a choice. Leave Tamar in the dirt and just, let her fend for herself. Or he can do what is culturally required of the time, and that is to give his second-born son to Tamar so that they can have a son to carry on his firstborn's line. Judah, trying to right this wrong, does so. And everything is perfect in Judah's world again, right? Let's continue reading in verse 9. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground, so as to not give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah my son grows up, for he has feared that he will die like his brothers." So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. Judah's second-born was just as wicked as the first. He doesn't want to father a child because he knows that it will be in his brother's name and not his. Selfish. Judah's second son is selfish. So instead of completing the marital things that 2 people do, he doesn't. He disobeys the orders that were given him. He brings shame upon himself. He brings shame upon his family. And he is wicked in the eyes of the Lord. And just like his older brother, he too succumbs to the same fate. Judah has another choice. Give Tamar his last son or find another way. Judah begs. He says, hey, let my son grow up. He is so scared. Both of his brothers have married you, and now they are dead. Let him grow up, and as soon as he grows up, I'll give him to you. Just wait at your father's house. Seems like a pretty good deal. Everything is now right in Judah's world. It's the best that it can be. It's not going to stay that way. We'll pick back up in verse 12. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Tamar to his sheep herders, he and his friend Hirah the Aldamite. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself in a veil, wrapping herself, and sat at the entrance to Enam, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. Judah's son grows up. Judah does not live up to his end of the bargain. I can only imagine what's going through Judah's mind. If I was Judah, I would be thinking, this girl's bad luck, and I don't want my son anywhere near this woman, because every time I send my son there, they die. And that's honestly the opinion I had when I read this chapter for so long. I was like, Judah can't be that bad of a guy. He's just trying to protect his sons. But Judah is he is the focal point of this wickedness. Ooh. And Judah refuses to give up his last son. And he just continues this path of wickedness. And in this next section, we read, Judah is going to reap what he sows. We'll pick back up in verse 15. This is going to be a bigger chunk, so stay with me. Starting in verse 15. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come into you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, what will you give me that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it, he said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put the garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Aldamite, to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, where is the cult prostitute who was at Enam at the roadside? And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also the men of the place said no cult prostitute had been there. And Judah replied, let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out, and let her be burned. A lot has happened in these verses. 9 verses, a lot can happen. Tamar finds out that Judah is not giving up his youngest son. She's been waiting this whole time. Who knows how? It doesn't tell us how long she waited. It could be months. It could have been years. and she finds out that Judah is not going to give his son away. So Tamar has had enough. She decides that she is going to take matters into her own hands. Tamar dresses up like a prostitute and tricks Judah into having relations with her. He agrees and offers her a young goat. There's just one problem. Judah doesn't have a goat with him. So she asks for some collateral. She says, I'll let you do this, but you have to give me something so I know you're serious about the deal. Because she's already been fooled by Judah's deals once. So he gives her his signet ring, his staff, and his cord. Now, a cord can be translated one of two ways. Either the belt that would tie a tunic, or the coat itself. So Judah gives us his staff, his ring, and his coat as collateral. Tamar returns home with these objects after they have done the deed, and they wait. Judah goes home, sends his best friend with the goat, says, go take this to the prostitute, it's what I owe her. There's only one problem. This man can't find the prostitute. And he returns back to Judah, says, I can't find the prostitute. Everyone says there's never been a prostitute. And Judah laughs it off. Says, well, I gotta keep my goat. I'm just out a ring, a staff, and a coat. Get those anywhere. Well, a few months go by, and Tamar is brought before Judah. She's brought before Judah, and they claim that she has been unfaithful to Judah's youngest son. She's pregnant. And if Judah's youngest son and her have never been with each other, there's no way she could be pregnant. So it has to be out of immorality. So Judah becomes furious and sentences her to death. Death by fire. It comes to the part in our story where all hope for Tamar seems lost. She is a woman at the mercy of her father-in-law who, let's be honest, probably doesn't like her that much. All hope seems lost. The situation looks very grim. But then we get to verse 25. And verse 25 says, as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify whose these are, the signet and the coat and the staff. Tamar pulls the ultimate trump card. The Uno reverse of all Uno reverses. She brings out Judah's staff and Judah's ring and Judah's coat and says, whoever these items belong to is the father of this child. Please identify whose these are. Now there's a really interesting phrase that she uses. In Hebrew, it is hakerna, or hakerna. It roughly translates to recognize these. This whole situation is weird, and when I was reading this, I thought, where have we seen this before? Where have we seen a problem created by a goat and a coat? I did some research, and it's actually already happened twice in Genesis. I'll tell you another secret. Both times it happened in Judah's family. In Genesis 27, we get the story of Jacob stealing the blessing from Esau, from his brother. Jacob cooks his father some lamb or some goat, and then he wears a coat of goat's wool to appear like his brother. This causes Jacob to flee, and it puts unnecessary strife between him and his brother. The next time they see each other, it is a very tense interaction. The next time we see this is actually a chapter before the chapter we're talking about today. It happens in chapter 37. Joseph's brothers have just sold him into slavery. They have gotten rid of the little turd that has pestered them for years. Daddy's golden child is gone. But there's just one problem. They can't go home without Joseph. They can't go home and say, well, Dad, we had enough of Joseph, so we sold him into slavery. So they come up with a plan, and they slaughter a goat. And they dip Joseph's coat in the goat blood. And when they come home, they approach their father, and they ask him, with Joseph's bloody coat in their arms, they say, Hakarna, do you recognize these? Judah has heard this phrase before. Judah might have even said these words before. Judah sees his items, and instantly he is faced with another choice. Judah can deny what he has done, even though all the evidence is there, and bring shame upon him. And as we've seen before, God has no problem striking down wicked men. Or he can accept responsibility and finally break this cycle of wickedness his family has been stuck in. Here is Judah's response. Then Judah identified them and said, she, being Tamar, is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not know her again. Tamar is more righteous than I. Judah, finally doing something right, owns up to his mess. And this, in my opinion, is the turning point for Judah's family. Look, it's like they do a complete 180. Let's look at how this messed up family deals with trials later on. Later in Genesis, we see the brothers in quite the pickle. And they handle it way better than they've handled problems in the past. In Genesis chapter 42 through 44, we see the family in a very dangerous situation. Joseph is putting his brothers to a test to see if they are still as wicked as they were when he last saw them. It gets to the point where Joseph is demanding they bring their youngest brother back from home. One brother sacrifices his freedom to make sure the rest of his brothers are safe. Something that back in chapter 37, I don't think they would have done. In less than 10 chapters, we see this family do a complete 180. In fact, when the brothers go home to their father, they are trying to convince him to let Benjamin come back to Israel so they can prove to Joseph and get their other brother back. And Reuben, Joseph's oldest brother, says, if I don't bring your son back, kill both of mine. Kill my two sons if I do not bring yours back. In 10 chapters, his family has completely turned around. These brothers have, it's like their wickedness just, whoop, is gone. And this is the only chapter we have to see that family. This is the starting point of them turning around. And it's a chapter dealing with Judah and his family drama. This chapter is important. That just seems cool to me. At this point, I have to wonder if you guys are thinking, is this the last time? Like, is this story just important to Joseph's story? Is this story just important to Genesis? Like, what does this have to do with me? And when I was writing this, I didn't have an ending. I didn't have a connection to the audience. Then, during my Bible reading, I was reading the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew, and instead of just telling you, turn to Matthew 1. Matthew chapter 1. The genealogy of Jesus Christ. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Tamar, the child that Judah had with Tamar, is in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Why is this so important? God preserves the line of the family of Judah, the sons of Jacob, through whom Jesus Christ would come through. God works outside of all the gunk and all the cultural order of the day to achieve God's purpose, meaning through Judah's mess and through Judah's sin, he brought the greatest gift the world would ever know. I end today with a question. What is God trying to do through your mess? Thank you.